Hello, it's Scott Manley here. Last year I bought this aircraft. It is an Aerospool WT9. It is a light sport aircraft designed for two people. It has a 100 horsepower engine, and in addition to being quite fun to fly, it's also pretty economical, with the cost of this per hour being like 1/7 of what it costs to rent the other aircraft that I fly. Also, I'm not the only owner. I actually split this 4 ways with 3 other pilots. But I haven't posted any videos in it until now because, well, I haven't been able to solo it.
NOS traffic, light sport, 5905 Delta Yankee taking off runway 13. We're going to make a downwind departure to the north. NOS.
Well, that was until Friday when I actually finally flew it on my own for the first time. You see, the insurance people wanted me to get a lot of experience with a designated instructor to make sure that me as a low-time pilot would have the necessary skills to handle this unfamiliar aircraft. But this same day would also be the first time I experienced an abnormal, a problem with the aircraft that I thought was a hardware failure. I thought it was something that could develop into an emergency, and as it turns out, no, it wasn't a problem with the plane, it was actually a problem with my checklists and the documentation. And we will get to that, but first of all, let's talk about the plane itself. As I said, it's a WT9 Dynamic. It's made in Eastern Europe, specifically in Slovakia, and this specific one is from 2009. It's a couple of decades old, and I think they've sold almost 1,000 of these.
NOS traffic, 5905 Delta Yankee, tornado left crosswind runway 13 NOS.
So this is a very light aircraft. It was originally built as a microlight in Europe, which means that it would have a maximum takeoff weight of 450 kilograms, right? That is not very much. Now this specific one was uprated a little and has a maximum takeoff weight of 550, which is nice because it means that I can actually use both seats.
NOS traffic, 5905 Delta Yankee, turning left downwind runway 13 NOS.
So this aircraft qualifies as what's called a light sport aircraft. That's supposed to be a lighter, lower cost option. You can get a special license called a sport pilot license, which takes a lot less time. You don't need to have night flying skills. You don't need to have a whole lot of instrument skills. And also you don't need to have a medical, so you can actually just fly this with a driver's license. But the main thing that attracted me to it is because it's very light, it has a much smaller engine. It has a 100 horsepower Rotax 912 engine on it. That's less than half of the 215 horsepower I have in the Cirrus.
And NOS traffic, 5905, there's a Delta Yankee clearing the pattern.
But it's less than 1/3 of the weight, so this thing climbs way faster, and its top speed isn't as fast as the Cirrus, but it's pretty sporty. And as a bonus point, the Rotax will also run on regular unleaded car gasoline, so I don't have to worry about lead pollution. Not to mention the confused looks you get when you drive into a garage in an electric car and fill up with 25 gallons of premium. That's enough to keep this thing flying at cruise speed for well over 5 hours, giving me a range of 600 miles or more depending upon how fast I want to go, and this thing will be doing 125 miles an hour at its most efficient cruise setting. Of course, this flight wasn't nearly so long. It was only a little short hop to another airfield to meet the instructor. But let's be clear, it's also super low tech in other ways. For example, it has this chunky manually actuated flaps lever. No electric flaps, no electric trim. There's a brake lever instead of foot brakes. Every time I'm getting set up for landing, I'm reminding myself what I'm going to use for brakes because it varies between the 2 different planes that I fly. Last thing you want to do is find yourself rolling down the runway at 50 miles an hour and not knowing how to stop. The avionics are all different. This has 2009 era displays from a company called TrueTrack. They actually made these for a very short time before they stopped making them because they couldn't get certain key components. The center component is a Garmin GPS unit, which barely talks to the other things. That was what passed for an electronic flight bag in 2009. Of course, nowadays an iPad does almost all the same things. And if you look just to the left of that display, there's also an iPhone I've got displayed there running ForeFlight, so I can actually see other traffic and look up things. I'm not sure I have enough room to use an iPad because that's stick between your legs. I think it'll end up bumping against my knee board, so I need to get a smaller iPad mini or something for these. Oh yeah, and did I mention, by the way, that this thing is really light? And because it's really light and has big wings, it'll stall with full flaps at about 35 knots. So anyway, let's talk about the flight with the instructor, where I had my abnormal.
I could try 60-degree turns.
You can go to 60 if you want. Don't pull 10 Gs and rip the wings off, though.
This thing is okay for 4 Gs.
4 Gs is okay.
Actually, this is okay for 6G.
Ah.
But yeah, 60 degrees should be 6G.
Oh, 60 degrees.
Sorry, 60 degrees should be 2G.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's the inverse of the cosine of the angle.
Oh my goodness, you're doing math in the middle of this deep turn?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Very impressive.
You know, that's how the cosmonauts were trained. They would throw them out of a plane and they had math problems to solve before they could pull their parachute.
I'll be honest, I think the primary flight display overestimates the bank angles in these steep turns.
Oh, there, see, that's the 60-degree one I was doing. This is wild. I think this EFUS may underestimate, and I'm getting high here. Lets me get back. Yeah, it's very close to my blowing that altitude there. Now I'm getting below it. Come on, Scott. This is making a bit of a mess of this one.
So yeah, pretty much up doing maneuvers, having fun, flying the aircraft, learning to understand it.
Yeah, you see, new plane, having a hard time.
So after doing a bunch of maneuvers at altitude, we were doing some landings at Petaluma, then we went over to Sonoma Sky Park, and then we noticed that we were running out of power.
Yeah, because our volts are, we're losing power on this.
Go ahead and stop right here.
Yeah.
And run the power up like we did back over there, and see if it goes to the good side. When this quits, we're going to lose all of our stuff,
Yeah.
right? This will still work, but scary.
This is not working. Are all these things...
they look to all be in. You've got the master switch here. That's the one that should do it right there.
Yeah. But this one's not page. Volts, this is showing the same thing.
Yeah, they're in
Okay.
sync and it looks bad.
I kind of want to get this back to NOS. Is that okay?
If this fails, the engine will keep going, right?
Right, but then I don't want to be stuck at Petaluma with this.
But if this fails, it'll still be flying. This will still work.
Yep.
And this will still work, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was the moment the camera ran out of power.
That's terrible.
So anyway, yeah, here's some footage from earlier in the flight while I explain what happened. Yeah, so we had this voltage warning, checked it out, told us voltage was going down, we saw negative amps, we saw that we were losing power, and made the decision to fly back, because the way the engine works is there's actually 3 separate electrical systems. They're all in the same shaft. 2 of them power the 2 independent ignition circuits. So see, that's some built-in redundancy in aircraft engines. The ignition circuits are actually enabled by those red switches to the left of my flight display on the left. The 3rd circuit is supposed to provide power for everything else on the plane. It can provide up to 20 amps. And then there's a battery on the aircraft, which is of course used to power the instruments in flight if you don't have that alternator running. And that's what we were running on. It looked like we weren't getting any power from the engine. Now you'll notice that all the displays in this cockpit are electronic. There's no like old-fashioned steam gauges to give me my airspeed or altitude. If the power goes out, I would lose all that stuff. And look, that isn't terrible because all the flight controls are completely manual. The engine would continue to run. I wouldn't be able to talk on the radio. I wouldn't be able to read those instruments. And one of the biggest problems I've actually had with this is that the flaps are not supposed to be deployed above about 75 knots, and this plane just wants to go faster than that all the time. So I have to work really hard to slow the plane down enough initially just so I can deploy those flaps and then begin a descent at a reasonably safe speed. And so yeah, with that in mind, we decided to fly it back home, and it wasn't that far, it was less than 10 miles. I think perhaps our biggest concern is that if things started shutting down, our transponder might go off, we might not be visible to other aircraft, we might not be able to talk to them, so it would be some very old-fashioned seeing and avoiding. We safely got back, landed, parked the plane, closed it all up. I sent a text message to all the other members of the group saying, hey guys, I broke your plane. And I began trying to figure out what could be wrong. One of the things I had figured out was on this flight, since we were doing high altitude maneuvers, I had just turned on all the plane lights, because if you're doing maneuvers, it's good to be visible as much as possible. So I was burning extra power there. Because I was doing maneuvers, I had the fuel pump on in case we hit some negative G's or whatever. It's good to keep the fuel pressure up. So we were burning a lot more electrical power than normal. But when I finally found a wiring diagram, something clicked. It made me realise that there was an error in our checklists. I couldn't find any mention of this in the manual, but that ignition switch is a 4-position switch. There's off, that's position 0, and then there's position 3 when you're running the starter motor, and there's 2 intermediate positions. The first one, it turns on all the power and everything for the flight system. So you have your fuel pump, you have your engine management system, and that's what we flew with. But there was a second one, position 2. That's the position the key needs to be in if the charging is going to be enabled. And because we didn't know this, because our checklists hadn't passed this on, the previous owner hadn't explained this to us, and our key wasn't labelled. I can see that it was sometimes labelled in other people's cockpits, but even then the manuals didn't explain the difference between instrument and charge positions. And also our key wasn't spring loaded, so you have to manually turn it back after starting the engine. So even though we'd read the manual, we thought we understood everything, it turns out that we were missing stuff because we hadn't gone and dug into the wiring diagrams or took the cockpit apart and looked to see how everything was interconnected. But at the time, it felt like a real problem, like a real minor emergency, and I think that I did a pretty good job of dealing with it. So look, this wasn't a big deal. This was, documentation, understanding error on our part. Plane is great. I'm really enjoying learning it, and I'm really hoping that I'll get the opportunity to take up some air cadets and stuff and get them the first taste of flying, so that they can get in the cockpit in the right seat and I can say, hey, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.